Hi everyone, please take note of the following disclaimer. Please note that this video is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. It does not constitute financial advice. We are not registered financial advisors. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I got a special guest today, first time on the channel, Eric Nuttall from 9Point. So he is a partner, senior portfolio manager at 9Point. You guys probably seen him a few times on BNN talking about the energy sector. I consider him an energy expert. Thanks so much for taking the time, Eric. How's it going today?
You bet. Yeah, doing well. Happy to spend the time with you.
All right, perfect. So you're an energy expert. My audience is mostly Canadian. As we know, Canadians are pretty big on the energy sector. It's a big part of the overall Canadian stock market. So why don't you start by giving us an overall picture of, the energy sector in general, oil prices, and maybe a worldwide picture of how the energy sector is currently right now.
Yeah, you bet. And it's true. Energy is a large component of the Canadian index. I think Canadians are a lot more energy literate than many other people elsewhere in the world because of that. We're quite constructive in the outlook for energy in total. We think we're in a multi-year bull market for all forms energy. So we define that as oil, natural gas, coal, uranium. There's a lot of opportunities in that. And really, they all kind of revolve around the same theme, and that is demand for all forms of energy continues to hit all-time highs year after year after year. It's the reason why we say there is no energy transition when the demand for all of those things continue to hit, all-time high. What we've seen is those who have historically been most bearish on, I'll talk to oil specifically, an entity called the IEA, International Energy Association, last year kind of pivoted and they said, well, look at, we've been saying that peak demand's right around the corner. And in fact, we've changed our base expectation that is demand's going to grow out to the 2050s. So radical shift on the view of demand for oil and all things hydrocarbon. This kind of realization that this transition towards wind and solar has been a fairy tale. Natural gas was going to be viewed as a bridge fuel. It's morphed into the fuel, we think, foundationally. So at the same time as you have demand growth in all of these different aspects, there's profound supply challenges. Oil we've talked about many times. The biggest source of supply growth for the past 10 years have been U.S. shale. That's over. We're in the twilight of U.S. shale now. And so that means that we think that non-OPEC production is in the process of peaking. That's roughly 68% of total oil supplies. When I look at OPEC, similarly to what countries within non-OPEC have been experiencing, OPEC have really had different national priorities about expanding economies, diversification, et cetera. So they have not been investing in incremental supply either. And as they've been bringing barrels back onto the market that they curtailed during the COVID demand shock, we think spare capacity within OPEC is only about 1.5 million barrels per day. Well, that's 18 months of demand growth. So my mind goes, okay, if we have several decades worth of demand growth, it's going to grow anywhere from 13 to 19 million barrels per day. The biggest source of supply growth of the past 10 years is no more. Non-OPEC production is peaking, and OPEC only has 1.5 as spare capacity. Well, where is the necessary production growth going to come from? So ultimately, we think price will have to move high enough to incentivize significant investment. The future for oil is going to be offshore. It's no longer onshore. There's no basins that have meaningful scale anymore. And so what oil price is that? It certainly is not in the 60s. I don't think it's in the 70s. I think it's $80 or higher. By the conclusion of the bull market, which I think is measured in many years, I think ultimately oil is going to have to go high enough to rationalize demand. And when you think about every other commodity on the planet making all-time highs, oil's been kind of stuck in the mud for other reasons, which we can get
Yeah.
into. But when you think about oil on an inflation-adjusted basis, it's super cheap now. So for it to see all-time highs again, I don't think is out of the realm of possibility.
Okay, thanks for that overall picture. I know you follow this sector very, very closely. What can you tell us in terms of specifically for Canada, the Canadian oil and gas sector? So we got the giants like Canadian Natural and Suncor. What do you think? Do you think that US ramping up production, the drill, baby drill policy, and it's only the first year, is gonna keep prices low in the next couple of years during the US administration? What's your overall take on the Canadian landscape, if you will?
Yeah, so I would differ with my view in terms of U.S. growth. So U.S. production growth is now no more. It is in decline. The mantra of drill, baby, drill, we thought was completely moronic. The call to arms for an industry to willingly self-bankrupt themselves and meaningfully grow oil production, we'd really challenged for the past year. And ultimately, I think we've been proven correct now that we have U.S. production going down. So I think the world's really waking up to realize that US shale companies, and there's exceptions to this, but broadly speaking, have an inventory problem. They've depleted their best inventory during the low of the pricing cycle. What we now see are well results are getting worse when you adjust them for every foot of rock that they're drilling and completing. And so I think global investors are recognizing this and they're saying, well, what's a fair multiple to put on these shale companies now that they have an inventory challenge? They're going to have to diversify. We see U.S. companies going into, Azerbaijan and, to going down into Argentina and elsewhere. Well, why would they start exploring if there was all this low-hanging fruit in the shale basins in the United States? And so I think our thesis is really playing out. That is in stark contrast to what we see in Canada. Canadian oil companies, especially in the oil sands, really have decades worth of drilling inventory. So you don't have that
Mhm.
fear of inventory exhaustion. Plus, what I can feel is people are incrementally getting more bullish in the outlook for oil and realizing that this is not a sunset industry. And we've taken advantage of that energy ignorance to buy companies with long dated reserves because we were buying production, 10, 15, 20 years from now, and we were paying literally nothing for it. It was being just massively discounted, and we still think is being discounted now. So I think we're on the cusp of a realization that it's Canada's time to shine. We've had a change in somewhat what of a change in government, at least a change in tone to be a lot more constructive.
Hmm.
We have growing expansion in terms of pipeline capacity additions, expansions of existing ones. So we think there's adequate takeaway capacity to the end of this decade. So the era of massive discounts for our oil is no more. So we really think Canada is extremely well positioned to demonstrate the tremendous amount of value in our companies and to be the recipient of funds flows finally, because there was an exodus out of Canada for many, many years, rightfully so. We had an extremely antagonistic government, and that seemingly has come to an end.
Okay, interesting. And on the ETF side, 9 Point, you manage this fund here. So we're going to focus on the ETF because that's really what my audience focuses on. The 9 Point Energy Income Fund. So you manage this fund. I noticed that recently, I see it right at the top, effective not just a couple of weeks ago, you're increasing the distribution rate or target rate rather from 7% to 14%. So you see it right there on the website, 14% target distribution rate. So tell me a little bit about this fund, the stock selection. Let's start with maybe the stock selection first. If I look at the portfolio, it's predominantly Canadian, right? It's about 75% Canada, 25% United States, a little bit elsewhere. So talk to me a little bit about the stock selection and how you're choosing these energy companies that goes into this fund.
You bet. So I always think of like begin with the end in mind. And so what are we trying to achieve for owners of the ETF? What we're trying to generate is an honest, high distributable monthly cash flow.
Hmm.
Initially, we did come out with 7%. And so the strategy was really to own a basket of high dividend companies. That's obvious. That's obvious. But what was unique is we had a cover call option overlay. So we would sell the right to other people to buy our stock from us at a higher price at a future date. And so originally what we were doing is we were writing on about half on all of the stocks, but we'd be writing about half of the position. So and typically targeting 10 or 20% upside. So on average, if I own a company, we'd collect the monthly dividends, and then also somebody would pay us the right to buy that from us at a 10 or 20% a higher price. And we felt that the strategy was working fairly well. There was learning curves we had exposure to as mid caps for a period of time, which they did somewhat poorly. So what we're finding now is the best opportunity really is within Canada for reasons which we've talked about before. However, we do have a decent US exposure. There's definitely opportunities down there. And the change that we created was rather than writing at a 10 to 20% upside, to really accentuate the amount of cash to distribute to the ETF holders is The change has been we're writing, it's called at the money. So if we own 100 shares in a stock, we'll write on about 25 or 30 of those shares, and somebody will pay us the right to buy those shares from us at today's price. And because you're not trying to gain that 10% extra, the premium that you get for that is quite large. And at the same time, what we're doing is we're using very modest leverage, about 15%, because if you think about it, if we're selling 30 of those 100 shares, you're a little more defensive relative to what you can make in the underlying index, and so that's called tracking error. So just by using a very modest, reasonable amount of leverage, we're helping to shrink that as well. Plus, there's a bit of a carry as well that we earn from that, and so the strategy is effectively sell at the money calls on about 25 to 30% of the holdings, collect the monthly dividends along the way, collect interest on the excess money that we're borrowing. And then what we've been doing is, you mentioned, we just initiated this in the past month, and we've been very, very happy with what we've been doing. The team that I have for us, it's a very, very active approach towards options. It's not really passive. It's not just some blanket, small little basket of names. We're really looking for stocks that we think can do well, so that there's an element of capital appreciation, plus you get the income from it. And so when we say 14%, we wanted an honest distribution where it's not a lot of return of capital. And I think what we're so far, we're 1 month in, but we're very, very happy with how we've been executing the new strategy.
Okay, awesome. So 15% leverage. Why select 15%? Why not 25%, for example? I'm just curious about
there's
that.
there's a lot of mathematics behind it, which it's the goal is really to reduce the tracking error relative to other exchange, but still accentuate as much distributable free cash flow. So there's a lot of different variables in it. The math gets complicated very, very quickly, but that was the best to achieve the 14%. We felt, at least from the modeling that we've done, very modest leverage, just because this is an income product. We're trying to reduce the volatility as much as we can. So with very modest leverage, we reduce the tracking error, but then it also helps us realize a very healthy, honest, distributable free cash flow for our holders.
Interesting. Okay, so you are capturing quite a bit of upside. So you said you pretty much went 10%, 20% upside. So that's 10 or 20% out of the money calls on the whole thing, and you're switching to maybe at the money calls, but more like 20, 25% of the portfolio. Do I have that about right?
Yeah, like the philosophy before was, well, if you're an income investor and you can only make 10% in a month, then you'd be fine with that. But what we found is, and it's an evolution, is rather than doing that, by writing on 20 to 25 to 30% of the position, we still have 70% offensive or
Yeah.
25 to 30 defense. And because you're kind of capping the upside on the 25 to 30, you can actually get paid more for that option. So it's been an enhancement of our understanding of how to really maximize distributable free cash flow. We've always had other products where if people are very bullish on the underlying commodity and they're looking for maximum upside capture, this is really an income product. And so we're approaching it with an income mentality.
Yeah, it's the one I wanted to focus on because my audience is primarily income oriented. But you have another ETF, I believe, which is just without the income. I believe so. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
We do. Yeah, it's the 9 Point Energy Fund. But yeah,
Yeah.
for this conversation, it's just to say that it's, the end, beginning with the end in mind, and that is, how do we generate an honest stream of free cash flow to distribute that? And what's the best manner to do that in as least of a volatile manner, but still generating enough real free cash flow to generate a real
Yeah.
yield? And I feel like we've achieved the recipe to accomplish that.
Okay, so there's a lot of energy covered call ETFs in Canada. I think one of the more popular ones is the Global X one, where they have, maybe 10 or 15 stocks, oil and gas producers, and also things, pipelines like Enbridge. So only on Canada, only Canadian stocks, and then they have 25% leverage. They do covered calls. What do you think is the advantage your fund is gonna have? Because I do see a higher management fee. Correct me if I'm wrong. 1.5 is the management fee on the ETF. So I'm assuming it's very actively managed. I'm assuming there's also a lot more stocks. I see like US, Canada, more some worldwide stuff. So why would an investor consider the 9 Point fund? instead of like a pure Canadian regular energy covered call ETF, for
I
example.
think you hit the nail on the head. It's a very actively managed product where we're constantly evaluating what do we want to hold,
Hmm.
what stocks do we see have the merits of high yield, but also the potential to really do well over time. We're not uh, um, structured, fixed structured in terms of okay, how much do we sell, at what price, et cetera. There's an active management of the options, which we've done in the past to generate extra value. We're focused all around the world. This isn't just a Canadian pipelines fix vehicle. So we feel like over time we will have the potential to meaningfully outperform. Plus, you can't just stay in one geography. As bullish as we are in Canada, you've got to have the flexibility to change. For example, we're much more bullish on the United States when it comes to natural gas. We're much more bullish on Canada when it comes to oil. So you really have to evaluate
Okay.
everything. And in terms of the management fee, we always look at it in after fee returns. And so we're confident, or we're going to work our butts off to ensure that this is the number one energy income product on an after fee basis for our clients.
Awesome. Awesome. And in terms of stock selection, I see are you restricted to big cap only? Because I see some more mid cap in there. Do you have, is
Absolutely.
it like a loose
Yeah.
selection or
Yeah. So again, it's going back, it's like you're a chef and you're putting together a recipe of, okay, you know what the end product you want to be.
yeah.
What are the different components of that to achieve that? And so, no, we have a small cap. We have one small cap driller that's yielding about 9.5% for us. So I think we're looking where other people do not look because we're
Mhm.
leveraging 20 plus years of experience. I've been in the business since 2003. I've been focused on energy for, I don't know, God, it feels longer, 16, 17 of those years. We have the experience to be able to look and search the globe for opportunities. And we're uncovering some even recent ones. So some of the ones that you haven't seen, we're going to be adding to the fund or the ETF over the next couple of weeks, we think, where it will demonstrate the value add of having a very significant team to scour the earth for what are the very best yield opportunities that we can also write cover calls on as well to really generate the most amount of distribution in an honest way.
Awesome. Well, Eric, I know you're a busy guy. I'll let you go. Thank you so much for the overview of the energy sector worldwide in Canada. And guys, if you want to check it out, it's the 9 Point Energy Income Fund. So the code or the ETF symbol is NRGI. Make sure to check it out. All the details, the holdings and everything are, of course, on 9 Point's website. So, Eric, once again, hope to have you again back and keep us updated on the energy sector. I know you're an expert there. And yeah, take care. Thanks so much for your time.
You bet. Happy to spend the time with you.